Hi everyone. Hello. After a little bit of theory, we are going to do a practical exercise. Whom of you remembers how the embedded world looked like 20 years ago? Raise your hand. Okay, and now those of you who didn't remember, look at those people who do, and you will be checking how their face looks like when I will be telling you how the world looked like, how it looks like now, and of course what changed in the middle of those two. So, one big thing, 20 years ago, some people are not going to believe me. 20 years ago, Linux wasn't considered embedded in most places. Can you realize that? Yeah. But that's not the only thing that changed. So, many things have changed, and one of them is that open source has won, but just one of them, and we are going to get through a little bit of that a little bit more. My name is Marta, and I do security in open source, particularly in embedded. I've been contributing to places like Linux Kernel Yocto project and many other things, serving in security teams for various projects, and doing tooling, trainings, and other things. And those days I also deal a lot with the CRA, as you can imagine. So, there were elephants in the title of the talk, so they are flamingos just outside, but where are the elephants? And I can tell you there are quite many. And to find them, I propose you to go with this framework that allowed me to bring ideas together. Imagine your embedded device in the middle, and all those other elements as forces that affect your devices. If you change one of the forces, it has strong interdependencies with all of the other ones, and we are going to see that. So, we'll get through all of them starting from open source. Probably the easiest one for everyone. 20 years ago, embedded development was mostly proprietary. So you had proprietary operating systems, either written in-house or bought with heavy fees. And those real-time operating systems usually differed much in APIs, so you could get an open source library and put on top of that RTOS. But the problem was that the APIs were completely different, so you had to do adaptations, a lot of work, and well, a lot of effort. What has happened during the last years is that the embedded world has come to use open source, be it Linux or various real-time operating systems. And with that came more standard APIs. So what became possible is that you can easily port a library or the whole software stack. And at the end, what we have here, and I think what is a great thing, is that we can have small teams that are building devices that were impossible 20 years ago. Another part of this equation is that as you can take gigabytes of source code and put in your embedded device for a zero direct cost, the perception of the cost of software in many places is zero. And what does it lead to as issues? The open source is considered as zero cost. not taking into account all the maintenance work, bug fixes, contributing to the open source. And then, during those 20 years, the legal and licensing people, they managed to convince companies that they need to be serious about licenses. So what we see right now is that you can include a library if the license is right. But what we are missing for a secure product is the maintenance cost is not taken into account. Now, I see that from in many, especially bigger companies, they use open source, they use a lot of open source in their products, but at the end, they have teams that want to upstream, want to submit patches. The problem is that they have all the legal work to do, and just to submit a small patch for small issues that they have found out, it requires weeks of going around by email to get the authorization to do that. That is changing, but still, it exists, and I've even had people talking about that in the recent months. Then, one of the recent things I see, the open people coming from to the embedded field quite often come from the makers environment with the approach, if the prototype works, that's okay to ship. That's okay for prototypes, but we are going to see how it affects the whole thing in other places. So, now, from the open source, we move to the maintenance situation. A long time ago, it was simple. You had closed devices with a fixed functionality, and basically we didn't talk about updates because it didn't exist. Now, those days, we have complex devices that are or can be multifunction, and the presence of updates varies from very well done to non-existent. You have multiple update stacks that you can use or not. A good example for that is the Yocto project. You have many layers with different update tools. You can use them, and it's up to you to integrate them together. Or take a vendor's integration. There's no reference update stack for the Yocto project. Now, related to the vulnerability reporting subject before, the security updates that vendors currently ship, they are based on the released CVEs. And they are not based on real vulnerabilities. The final subject, fleet management and remote processing and applications. You are getting more and more devices that do have a remote part on the vendor server that it communicates to, either for the app to administer the device or for some other processing. And this is leading to a few things in a moment. So the structural issues in the maintenance is that when I ask a question at FOSDEM, how many OpenSSL versions people have in their project, the number of people who are able to tell that is increasing year to year, but it's still less than half of the room. What it means that if they do not know about OpenSSL, there are many other libraries they are not aware of. And it's not only libraries that you include directly, but it's also copied code that someone copied 10 years ago in another repo. All the statically linked libraries, and all those things that can lead to security vulnerabilities. people generate updates based on CVEs. But there are many projects that do not release CVEs or release CVEs only for certain things. So you may have a library that has a very serious security issue and nobody bothered to create a CVE for that. It doesn't mean you do not have a vulnerability. You have it. But just your CVE scanner doesn't show. And of course, related to vulnerabilities, we have all those both vendors, proprietary stacks with all things glued together, with vendor patches all around the place on some very, very old version. That is very hard to update and very hard to fix, and even to figure out what is in there. Yeah, and maintenance for embedded device vendors is not always in the plan, in the project plan. Sometimes it's just we are going to ship it, and that's it. That is changing, but still an issue in many projects. Now, about the cost and the team. So, a long time ago, it was more frequent to do an embedded board in-house, the custom design, that the company completely controlled. Of course, it was a simpler design with a smaller number of components. So there was a cost related to boards, and then on the other hand, with the proprietary real-time operating systems and in-house development, you had heavy costs on software. Those days, there are companies doing their own designs, but quite frequently they use some third-party boards that are staked on the main board, or they use designs that come from someone else. As I said, the perceived cost of software is close to zero because you do not have that many of those licensing costs of software. So you have this balance between the hardware and the software cost that has shown up. And then, of course, we are on the global markets right now. So there's also a competition between vendors and going down also on the development cost itself during the board development, and quite clearly on the salaries of people who do those boards. And last thing, there are some companies that are charging for security updates. Fortunately, that's going away with the CRA. But there are companies that have that kind of a business model. So the structural issues. Many companies, if they are not legally obliged, they are not going to fulfill requirements. Because of that, the CRA has good points, because it is going to force people to actually do things that they should. We have small teams that are those days developing devices more complex than ever, so also harder to debug than ever. Taking into account the problem with going down with costs, most of these devices are not enough tested, especially taking into account the whole complexity they have. And with the testing comes the fact that the security happens to be an optional feature. It happened even to me when we are optimizing a feature list to remove some security features because to make the device out of schedule. And if it happens to me, it happens to everyone. And yeah, of course, the pressure to deliver as soon as possible. So now, the last one, but not the least important one. Long time ago, you had mostly one-purpose device without network and with manual configuration. That was easy. And what you have now, multi-purpose and business critical, and sometimes even life critical. With quite frequently management of the device possible at scale with the remote access. So what does it mean? The devices are business critical, but the development model didn't change enough. And it's actually valuable for attackers to attack embedded devices, because you can attack many devices at the same time, and they are important information on there are important functions on those devices, and it actually makes sense for them. And my favorite part, web interfaces that many of those devices have, quite frequently done in an outsourced way and unmaintained, the ideal door for attackers. So I got through those 4 factors, and now let's add a CRA to the mix. The CRA reason is that the legislators have understood the importance of embedded. If embedded vendors were doing things right, we wouldn't have CRA. So they realized the part of the forces on the device count and importance, and what they did, they are forcing on the maintenance side, with a pretty good assumption that if you use one of those forces, you are going to change everything else. But not always in the way that you would expect. So, what are my crystal ball predictions for the next years? I do not see that much move to the CRA compliance for companies right now, but I would expect that big companies will start first. For a very clear reasons. If you look at the fines for companies, they are dependent on the annual turnover. And of course, the percentage of annual turnover for a big company is way important than for a small one. And they have a way more probability to be controlled. There is a risk of people trying to get out doing only paperwork and no real changes. The CRI requires some paperwork, and people might try to get out without doing real work, just writing stuff down. And I predict you that there will be panic in 2027. We can check into. I would say it will be around June, because December will be quite late, but I guess that we may even get media coverage in December. Of course, if there won't be any delay in the application of the law, that's also a possibility. So, a list of things to work on now. I could do pages and pages of that, but if I really want to go to essentials, the first thing is updates. If you do not have updates now, add them as soon as possible, because you can fix many things through an update. And also, update doesn't mean just update the user application, it means update of everything. And it may mean, in the embedded context, a change in your hardware. It may be that you have some hardware limitations that do not allow you to do the update correctly. And if you discover that in June 2027, that's going to be a little late. Then, your dependency list. You may already have a look either through SBOM or through other means. Have a real look of what you have in the dependency tree. And if the license is good, it's not always a good idea to include a library. Have a look of them, and if you are developing a product, it may be that you will need to maintain those libraries for 10 years or more. If that's something with unstable APIs or a lot of backports, you can ask yourself a question, am I going to maintain that for the next 10 years? The option of changing job to a different company, we do not count this one. You are also talking about other people in the same company. So if your answer for a given library is, I don't want to maintain that thing for the next 10 years, maybe you need to find out something else to use instead. And sometimes it's not tricky, because there are libraries used in the embedded world for some critical functions that I personally would absolutely not want to maintain for 10 years. Not going to give a list just right now. And then I recommend you really strongly to move to a policy to update all of your packages all the time and not just wait for CVEs. I know there are tools that tell you that there are 3 new CVEs, so now you are going to update it. But it's showing you a part of the situation. People are asking me what to do with the Linux kernel. The thing is that the Linux kernel is simply assigning CVEs to basically everything. So you see them. There are other libraries, other tools that do not assign CVEs. And your scanner doesn't see it, it doesn't mean that there are no vulnerabilities. For a secure product, way better to just update and take all fixes. Of course, there are requirements in this case. You either need to have good testing coverage, or that library and tool has to have stable APIs that you can use for years. And that's part of the choice problem. And then there are many other things in the security field to learn about. There are also small things like hardening that you can apply in your product directly and quite rapidly with a pretty high gain in the security. Also, start about thinking of adding security features to the product plan and sticking to it. Yes, it's necessary. Maybe it's not going to work the first one, the second one, the fifth one, but maybe the 30th one, it's going to work. It's going to stay. Better for everyone on the quality level, on the development easiness also. So, I would like to have a little bit of discussions right now. Always hard to have a first question that you have.
Yeah, hello. Okay, so you just said that the Linux kernel assigns CVEs to mostly everything, but there are a lot of other projects that don't do that. And my question is, are there best practices for, as a software maintainer myself, how can I know that a certain change is part of a security fix or something like that? Is there any guidelines or something like that?
Yeah. So there are pretty much there are guidelines. For example, you can see Openness for security teams of open source projects. And there's also a big guideline from the CVE program itself, a general guideline because it goes for pages. If a bug has impact on integrity of the data or code, confidentiality of the data, or availability, so like performance degradation or denial of service, this is a security vulnerability. So that applies to quite many situations that we have. And that definition applies no matter how important that situation is. So if there's slight degradation, it's CV also, but it's a low severity CV.
Okay.
Hope that answered that in a short way.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, during FOSDEM, you mentioned that there is some sort of an SPDX 3.0 coming up.
Could you repeat the beginning of the question, please?
During FOSDEM, I believe you mentioned there is some SPDX format 3.0 coming up, some newer one. Can you comment on that? What is the improvement in this format?
So SPDX is one of the formats for software bill of materials. And there have been SPDX 2.2 and 3 for years. That has been pretty much used in the industry. And recently they have released SPDX 3. That is a rework of the standard in such a way that it gets more modular, so you can decide which part of the specification you are generating or not. For example, SPDX 3 has explicit part about the vulnerabilities and the vulnerability information that it didn't really have in version 2. And the way it's structured, it allows an easier merging of various SPDX files together. So if you have multiple libraries that you bring together or multiple processors in the same product, then it may be easier for you to merge it all together and not deliver 50 SBOM files for the same product.
Thank you.
Hello. So is there any compliance test suite to say that my software or the patch is security safe, or something I can run to check, or it's just subjective?
Could you repeat, please? Especially the beginning.
Yeah, so I wanted to check if there is any compliance test suite or something I can run to check that my software is secure, or...
Oh, that's a great question and a gigantic subject. There are multiple things that you can do. There are tools like scanning SBOMs for non-vulnerabilities, but also tools that can scan the source code for code that looks problematic, static analysis. There are also tools like Kernel that's open source that you can scan the whole system for its configuration and see if your Linux system is secure, and it gives you some suggestions of what you can improve at the configuration level. There are even tools for the Linux kernel from the kernel self-protecting project with suggested kernel options that they recommend you to use. And they are tools that allow you to verify your kernel config, what it contains and what it doesn't. They are compiler options that increase security, and can check which of those compiler options you use. A big subject on this own. So there's a lot that you can do in a pretty automatic way.
Okay, thank you.
As somebody who's somewhere in the update business, let's just call it like that, the biggest challenge that I always see is somebody has to pay for it. That's the big problem, because most of the stuff that is sold does not have a recurring revenue model. So people just go for the lowest price initially, then they sell it off, and then they like, oh, now we need to maintain it for 5 years. Who's going to pay for this? And I think the biggest challenge that the CRA is bringing is actually it's forcing manufacturers to understand the importance of software as something that's really a line item in their cost structure. I mean, if the manufacturer or the person who's monetizing a product has it in their budget and in their planning, then the rest will follow. That's at least my take. Would you agree or not?
Exactly. That's the take of the CRA. They push for the maintenance in the understanding that if they push for the maintenance, then the security improvements will come. But the question is how the costs are going to be distributed, because the CRA itself puts all obligations on the manufacturer itself. It was different in drafts before, but in the current version, in the final version, all the obligations, all the requirements, like if you are a manufacturer, you are obliged to fix all libraries that you have included in your product. The upstream project doesn't have to help you. They may, but they have no obligation. If there is a bug, especially if you find out that someone is misusing the product, someone is attacking the product, using that bug, you must fix it. And it's you. Doesn't matter if you had the source code of that library or not. You must fix it in one way or another. And that's a big question now, how people will do it.
And just occurred to me, the people in this room, I think we should do a game. Everybody of us enters a suggestion on which manufacturer will be fined first. Because now, nobody of us can know. And in 3 years' time, we'll look back and we will know who's the winner. I will donate a prize, seriously. Let's make this happen, okay?
I think we have time for one more, if there's any more questions. Thank you. Oh, it's working?
No.
Check, okay. It works? Okay, okay, thank you. Just a consideration, maybe more than a question, but let's couple the maker, let's say, background with the perceived zero cost of software in some areas, and then the paperwork required by the CRA. My fear is that some manufacturer may put the extra budget for the security into paperwork and think that the CRA's issue is solved that way. That's my fear, at least, because they don't really perceive the cost of maintaining software, let's say, because it was zero cost until now. So why tomorrow is going to be different? So what's your take on this?
It's not. What? It's all no. Okay. So there is a real risk of the fact that some people decide to do paperwork as a priority instead of improving their processes and improving their software. And that's a real risk. And for me, that's the role of all of you to get friends with legal, so that legal people help you to get the correct features and the current improvements into the product plan. That's my workaround that I suggest to everyone. Get friends with legal. Get coffee and croissant with legal.
Thanks. So my question was, how big is the fee exactly? Because one way to go around this might also be that they will just provision funds to pay for fees and just not like fix the security issues if it actually costs less to just pay the fee, and that's a business decision that they could make. So how big is the fee in the CRA? Do you have some?
Basically, it's copy-pasting from the RGPD. So it's a single-digit percentage of the turnover depending on the situation. Even a single digit of a global turnover of the company, that in most big companies means that nobody wants to have that hot potato.
That's great.